All right, so let's get ready, because today we are diving into Frankenstein, but not just the monster part, like the typical stuff. We're going deeper today, like way deeper, and we're going to explore the ambitions of Robert Walton. He's the guy that's, framing this whole story for us. Mm-hmm. And we're also going to look at the origin story behind the book itself, all from Mary Shelley's own words.
Yeah, and it's fascinating how the story starts. We meet Robert Walton first, this explorer guy. He's the one setting up Victor Frankenstein's tale.
Right.
And his letters, they really paint this vivid picture of a man that's like completely driven by this ambition to conquer the Arctic.
Totally. And, it's not just like a casual trip for him, right? This is like a huge commitment.
Yeah.
He's dedicated 6 years of his life to this. He's endured hardships. He's, just buried himself in these books to prepare.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what's really driving him. Is it purely scientific curiosity, or is there something more there?
Yeah, that's the big question. It's like, what makes someone risk everything to venture into the unknown like that?
Well, he even says himself that he has this belief in the marvelous that's pushing him beyond, he calls the common pathways of men.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. It almost makes it sound like he's chasing a dream, like a vision, something almost mystical driving him forward.
And isn't that where we start to see the parallel between Walton and Victor Frankenstein emerge? They're both incredibly ambitious. They yearn for knowledge. They want recognition.
Yeah, definitely.
But could that ambition be what's dangerous?
It definitely brings up that question. If you think about the myth of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and faced eternal punishment for it, it makes you wonder, are Walton and Frankenstein stepping into that same kind of territory? Are they reaching for knowledge that humans aren't meant to have?
It's a chilling thought, for sure. It makes you think about how their ambition ties into this feeling of isolation. Yeah. I mean, think about Walton alone on that ship, desperate for a friend who really gets his intellectual pursuits.
Right.
It's almost like the thing that's driving him forward is also what's isolating him in a way.
Absolutely. He does find some connection with the ship's lieutenant, though, despite their differences.
Oh, that's right.
He even says that this guy has, national and professional prejudices, but still possesses some of the noblest endowments of humanity.
Interesting.
Which I think highlights that even in isolation, you can still find these moments of human connection.
It makes you wonder, would Walton be so fixated on the Arctic if he had, a close circle of friends who shared his passions?
Yeah.
Could those relationships maybe ground him a bit, temper that ambition?
Possibly. It's interesting to think about how isolation might actually make ambition stronger, more potent, more consuming.
Yeah, that makes sense. And speaking of potent and consuming, should we shift gears a bit to talk about the birth of Frankenstein itself?
Okay, yeah, sure. Let's do that.
All right, so you have to set the scene for us here. We've got Mary Shelley, Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, all huddled together in this villa by Lake Geneva, treating these spooky ghost stories. Sounds like something straight out of a Gothic novel.
It's pretty incredible, isn't it? To imagine that atmosphere, the stormy weather, flickering candlelight, and these literary giants just swapping these supernatural tales.
Oh, yeah.
And, Shelley actually says that at first she felt this blank incapability of invention.
Oh, wow.
But then she has that famous waking dream.
Right.
The one about the student who creates life and is completely horrified by what he's done.
And that's where the spark for Frankenstein happens.
Exactly. And this context is so important because it adds another layer to these themes we've been talking about. The ghost stories, the eerie atmosphere, the fear of the unknown. They all play a part in how the novel explores this dark side of creation, the consequences of trying to play God.
It's like Shelley took all those anxieties her to time, those fears about science becoming too powerful and things going terribly wrong.
Yeah.
And she gave them this monstrous form.
That's a great way to put it.
And what I find really interesting is that she was very deliberate in grounding this fantastical story in like the real world.
Yeah.
She talks about the truth of the elementary principles of human nature.
And that's what makes Frankenstein more than just a horror story. It becomes a reflection of ourselves, our ambitions, our fears. It's like this dark potential that might be hiding inside all of us.
That's a good point. Yeah, it really makes you think about, the weight of these choices that people make. To have that power to create, but maybe not the wisdom to know what to do with it.
Oh, absolutely.
And that brings us to the creature himself, right?
Yeah.
Because his whole journey is so connected to this idea of forbidden knowledge.
For sure. He's thrust into this world, totally innocent, and yet immediately judged for how he looks. And his desire for knowledge It becomes this desperate attempt to understand who he is, his existence, this world that he's suddenly a part of.
It's like he's a blank slate soaking up everything around him, learning language by watching the DeLacy family, finding comfort and also torment in the books that he reads, like Paradise Lost, Plutarch, The Sorrows of Werther.
Oh yeah, those are big ones.
It's almost as if he's trying to build his own sense of humanity from these little pieces of knowledge.
And the more he learns, the more aware he becomes of his own isolation, his otherness. He sees how beautiful knowledge can be, but also the ugliness of how he was created, the rejection he faces just because of his appearance. It's like this tragic realization that knowledge doesn't guarantee acceptance or belonging.
It's really sad. And he even has that line about knowledge. He says, "Of what a strange nature is knowledge. It clings to the mind when it has once seized on it like lichen on the rock." It shows how deeply he feels things, how much he's struggling with these huge questions about existence.
Yeah, he's not just a mindless monster, He's wrestling with big ideas, good and evil, the meaning of life.
Right.
His thirst for knowledge, it mirrors Victor's, but their paths are so different. He doesn't have any guidance, the mentorship that Victor had. He's forced to learn in the shadows, to put together his own understanding from scraps.
And that isolation, that rejection, it fuels so much anger in him. He becomes fixated on finding his creator,
Right.
demanding a companion,
Yeah.
someone who can understand his pain.
Right, it's like his way of trying to make things right, to find some kind of justice. He believes that if he's not allowed to be a part of human society, then he'll just create his own. It's a twisted ambition that comes from despair and loneliness.
But it also makes you ask, is his anger justified? Can we really blame him for what he does after everything he's been through?
That's the moral dilemma at the heart of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Shelley doesn't give us easy answers. She makes us consider the creature's point of view. To see his suffering, his intelligence, his ability to love and to rage, we can't just write him off as a monster.
That's true.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating how his journey reflects back on Walton's, almost like a warning sign.
Yeah.
Here's Walton so driven by this intense ambition, risking his life and the lives of his crew. Is he heading down a similar path to destruction?
It's definitely a parallel that Shelley wanted us to see. Both men are driven, isolated, seeking something beyond the ordinary. But Walton has this advantage. He gets to hear Frankenstein's story. He sees firsthand the terrible consequences of unchecked ambition. The question is, will he learn from it?
Will he understand that wanting knowledge, wanting glory, it needs to be balanced with human connection, with compassion? It's a choice that Victor and the creature were both denied, and it led to their downfall. It's just heartbreaking, And it's not just what he does, it's how he talks about his pain, his longing, the way he expresses himself so eloquently, his ability to reason and argue. That's what makes him seem so human. It's almost scary.
Yeah, you're right. He's not just acting out, he's using words. And he even throws Victor's own words back at him. Remember when he says, "Are you to be happy while I grovel in the dust?"
Yeah, it's such a powerful moment.
It is, because it points out Victor's hypocrisy. He's highlighting the responsibility that comes with creating something. Victor was so focused on actually making life that he completely forgot about the creature's needs, his right to be happy.
He really did. It's like a huge failure of empathy.
Totally.
And it makes me think about how both Victor and Walton, even though they're so ambitious, they also seem to really crave connection.
That's a good point.
Victor wants to be with his family, Elizabeth. And Walton is longing for that friend who understands him.
Yeah, but they both make choices that isolate them even more. Victor abandons his creation and cuts himself off from the people he loves. And Walton, in his pursuit of the North Pole, he risks pushing away his crew. It's like he's following the same tragic path as Victor.
It's like they're both chasing something that could destroy them in the end. But going back to the creature's demand for a companion, do you think it's a legitimate request? Can we really blame him for wanting someone who gets what he's going through?
That's where I think Shelley is so brilliant. She doesn't give us any easy answers. On one hand, you have this being who is completely alone and desperate for connection. But on the other hand, if his wish is granted, it could lead to chaos, maybe even destruction. It forces us to think about how complicated compassion is and the limits of responsibility.
Yeah, it all comes back to that big question we keep talking about, the consequences of ambition and the dangers of isolation. When Walton hears Frankenstein's story, it's like a huge warning sign.
Right.
It shows what can happen when ambition takes over, when wanting knowledge becomes more important than human connection.
And in the end, when the creature decides to end his own life, consumed by guilt and despair, it's just heartbreaking. It shows the power of isolation, and it makes it clear that we need empathy and understanding. We need to see the humanity in everyone, even those who are different from us.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Frankenstein, what are the big things we should be thinking about? What should our listeners take away from all of this?
Well, I think Shelley leaves us with this feeling of unease, like there's this question that lingers. Could Frankenstein's tragedy have been avoided if he had just looked for some companionship and guidance in his scientific work? It makes us think about our own ambitions and the things we're chasing, and reminds us how important human connection is and ethical considerations. Those things matter in everything we do. Frankenstein isn't just a horror story, it's like a mirror reflecting back at us, showing us the potential we all have for good and for monstrous acts.
That's a really good way to put it. It's a story that still feels relevant centuries later. It reminds us that wanting knowledge and progress should never mean sacrificing our humanity. And on that note, we'll leave you to think about the power of Shelley's masterpiece. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, but never forget the human connection that holds us all together.